The auction house on Station Nexus 7 was packed with buyers from every corner of the galaxy. Species of all shapes and sizes crowded the massive hall, their translator devices creating a constant buzz of overlapping conversations. Expensive items from 1,000 worlds sat under glass cases, waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. Commander Kethral of the Vexian Empire stood near the back of the hall, his 4 arms crossed over his chest. His silver skin reflected the harsh lights above, and his compound eyes scanned the room with obvious boredom. He had come here looking for weapons, something to add to his personal collection. The Vexian military paid him well, and he had developed a taste for rare and powerful items. His assistant, a smaller Vexian named Tor, pointed toward one of the display cases. "Commander, they are bringing out the human artifacts now." Kethral made a sound of disgust. "Human artifacts? What could those primitive creatures possibly have worth my time?" The humans were new to galactic society. They had only made first contact with the wider universe about 50 years ago, and most species still considered them to be barely civilized. Their technology was laughably behind everyone else. While other races had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, humans had only recently figured out basic space travel. But Kethral was curious despite himself. He pushed through the crowd to get a better look at what the auctioneer was displaying. On a velvet cloth sat several items. There were some primitive communication devices, a few pieces of what looked like jewelry, and in the center, something that made Kethral pause. It was a weapon. That much was obvious from its shape, but it looked nothing like any weapon he had ever seen. It was made of metal and some kind of dark material, with a long tube extending from a handle. There were no power cells visible, no energy ports, nothing that would indicate how it functioned. "What is that thing?" Kethral asked, pointing at the weapon. The auctioneer, a Belthian with too many teeth and not enough eyes, smiled at the commander's interest. This is a most unusual item. It is called a revolver, a human weapon from their pre-space era. This particular model is over 300 of their years old." 300 years? Tor laughed. "It belongs in a museum of ancient history, not a weapons auction." Several nearby aliens joined in the laughter. A Krellian trader with green scales and a permanent sneer stepped forward. "I have seen human weapons before. They use chemical reactions to launch small pieces of metal. Can you imagine anything more primitive?" "Chemical reactions!" another voice called out. "My species stopped using such things before humans even existed." The laughter grew louder. Kethral found himself smiling as well. The idea of using explosive chemicals to propel a piece of metal was absurd when compared to plasma rifles and particle beams. "It is quite functional," the auctioneer said, trying to maintain some dignity for the item. "The previous owner claimed it still fires perfectly." "And what does it fire?" Kethral asked, his tone mocking. "Stones? Sharpened sticks?" "Bullets," the auctioneer replied. "Small metal projectiles." This brought even more laughter from the crowd. A Nexian trader with tentacles where his face should be waved dismissively. "My personal shields could stop 1,000 such projectiles without even flickering. Human weapons are toys for children." "Less than toys," the Krellian added. "My offspring play with more dangerous items." Kethral was about to turn away when he noticed something. There was a human in the crowd. He stood alone near one of the pillars, watching the scene with an expression that Kethral could not quite read. The human was older, with gray hair and lines on his face. He wore simple clothes that marked him as neither wealthy nor important. What caught Kethral's attention was the human's lack of reaction. Everyone was laughing, including Kethral's own people. But the human simply stood there, watching. If anything, his expression looked almost sad. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Shall we start the bidding? The opening price is 100 galactic credits." No one spoke. The laughter had died down, but no one was willing to waste even a small amount on such a primitive item. 50 credits, then, the auctioneer said, his voice uncertain. Surely someone wants this piece of history. Still nothing. Kethrall saw the human shift his weight slightly, but he did not raise his hand. 20 credits? Anyone? I will give you 5 credits to throw it in a recycler, the Krellian said, drawing more laughter. The auctioneer looked defeated. He was about to move on to the next item when a voice rang out across the hall. 1,000 credits! Everyone turned to look at the speaker. It was the human. He had not moved from his position by the pillar, but his voice had carried clearly through the sudden silence. Kethrall stared at him. You would pay 1,000 credits for that ancient piece of garbage? The human met his gaze without flinching. I would. Why? Tor asked, genuine confusion in his voice. You could buy a modern plasma pistol for half that price. The human smiled, but there was no humor in it. That revolver was carried by my great-great-grandfather. He used it in something called the Second World War. It has been in my family for generations. Sentimental value, the Krellian sneered. How typically human. You attach emotions to objects as if they have souls. Perhaps, the human said. Or perhaps I simply understand something that you do not. Kethrall felt his temper rise. He did not like being spoken to that way, especially by a human. And what could you possibly understand that we do not? Your species was still living in caves when mine built its first starship. The human did not respond immediately. He walked toward the display case, moving through the crowd that parted before him. When he reached the case, he looked down at the revolver for a long moment. This weapon has killed more enemies than any of you have ever faced in your lifetimes, he said quietly. My ancestor carried it through battles that would make your wars look like games. He killed men with it. He saved his friends with it. He survived things that should have killed him 100 times over. The Krellian laughed again. Battles? Human battles are nothing. Your wars are fought with primitive weapons over tiny patches of your single planet. You have no idea what real combat looks like. The human turned to face the alien. I served 30 years in my planet's military. I have been in combat more times than I can count. I have watched friends die in my arms. I have killed enemies so close I could see their eyes when the life left them. With what? That toy? Kethrall gestured at the revolver. Against enemies with real weapons, you would be dead before you even raised it. Something changed in the human's expression. It was subtle, but Kethrall noticed it. The sadness was gone, replaced by something harder, something more dangerous. You speak of weapons, the human said, of plasma and particles and energy shields. You believe that technology makes you superior. That because you have been in space longer, you understand war better than we do. It is not a belief, the Krellian said. It is a fact. The human nodded slowly. Tell me something. In all your advanced wars, with all your superior weapons, have any of you ever fought in the mud? Have you ever gone without food for days while hunting an enemy through a jungle? Have you ever held a knife to another being's throat and watched the fear in their eyes as you decided whether they would live or die? No one answered. Have you ever had to conserve your ammunition because you knew no resupply was coming? Have you ever counted every shot, knowing that when you ran out, you would have to kill with your hands or die trying? The silence in the hall was complete now. Even the constant buzz of the translator devices seemed to have faded. The human picked up the revolver. The auctioneer started to protest, but something in the human's bearing made him stay quiet. This weapon holds 6 shots, the human said, holding up the revolver. 6. Not 1,000 like your plasma rifles. Not unlimited like your particle beams. 6 chances to kill or be killed. Every shot had to count. Every trigger pull was a decision that could not be taken back. He opened the cylinder with practiced ease, showing that it was empty. My ancestor faced enemies who wanted to destroy everything he loved. He did not have shields or scanners or computers to help him. He had this, his training, and his will to survive. Kethrol found himself unable to look away. Despite his contempt, something about the human's words was affecting him. "You mock us for being primitive," the human continued. "You laugh at our weapons and our short history among the stars. But you forget something important. We did not survive and build our civilization by being lucky. We did it by being the most stubborn, most adaptable, most willing to suffer and fight and die of any species on our planet." He clicked the cylinder closed and raised the revolver, pointing it at the ceiling. "Every species that ever competed with us is either extinct or our servant. Not because we were stronger or faster or smarter. Because we never, ever give up. Because when our backs are against the wall, we become something that even we fear." The Krellian tried to laugh, but it came out as a nervous cough. "Words, human propaganda, you are trying to intimidate us with stories." The human lowered the weapon and looked directly at the Krellian. "I am trying to educate you. There is a difference. One day, you may find yourself facing humans in battle. When that day comes, I want you to remember this moment. Remember the primitive weapon you mocked. Remember the old man you dismissed." "And what will remembering do for me?" the Krellian asked. The human smiled again, and this time Kethrol saw something that made his compound eyes narrow. It was the smile of someone who had seen too much, done too much, and survived too much to be frightened by anything anymore. "It might help you understand why you are about to die," the human said. The words hung in the air for a long moment. Then the human turned back to the auctioneer. 1,000 credits. Do I have the bid?" The auctioneer nodded quickly. "Yes, 1,000 credits. Anyone else?" No one spoke. Kethrol considered bidding just to spite the human. But something held him back. Some instinct that he could not name. "Sold to the human gentleman," the auctioneer said, his voice relieved. "Please see the payment desk to collect your item." The human walked toward the payment desk without looking back. The crowd parted before him again, more quickly this time. Kethrol watched him go. He turned to Tor, who was staring at the human with an expression of confusion and something else. Fear, perhaps. "Commander?" Tor asked. "What just happened?" Kethrol did not answer immediately. He was thinking about the human's words, about the look in his eyes, about the way he had held that ancient weapon as if it were an extension of his body. "I do not know," Kethrol admitted finally. "But I think we may have underestimated the humans." Tor laughed nervously. "Underestimated them?" "They are barely civilized. They have nothing that could threaten us." "Perhaps," Kethrol said, but he was not sure anymore. He watched the human collect the revolver and place it carefully in a case. The old man handled the weapon with a reverence that Kethrol had never seen anyone show toward any object. It was more than sentiment. It was respect. Respect for what the weapon represented, what it had done, what it could still do. As the human left the auction house, Kethrol made a decision. He needed to learn more about these humans, about their history, about their wars, about what made them the way they were. He had a feeling that such knowledge might be important someday. Important for survival. The auction continued around him, but Kethrol was no longer interested in buying anything. He had come here looking for weapons, and in a way, he had found one. Just not the kind he had expected. He had found a warning. Later that night, Kethrol sat in his quarters aboard his ship, searching through the Galactic Information Network for data on human history. What he found disturbed him deeply. The humans had fought each other for their entire existence. War after war after war, stretching back into their prehistory. They had developed new weapons constantly, each one more destructive than the last. They had killed each other by the millions, by the tens of millions, and they had kept going. He found records of their Second World War, the conflict the human had mentioned. He read about battles that lasted for months, with thousands dying for a single hill or building. He read about soldiers who fought until they had no ammunition, then fought with knives, then fought with their bare hands. He found pictures of the weapon called a revolver and others like it, rifles, machine guns, artillery, simple chemical-based weapons that had killed more beings than most galactic empires had citizens. And he found something else, something that made his blood run cold. The humans had developed weapons capable of destroying entire cities in a single moment. They called them nuclear weapons, and they had used them against their own kind. Any species capable of such destruction against themselves would be capable of anything against an enemy. Kethral closed the information screen and sat in the darkness of his quarters. He thought about the human at the auction, about the ancient weapon in his hands, about the look in his eyes when he had spoken of combat and survival and the will to fight. He had been right to feel that warning. The humans were not primitive. They were not harmless. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors. And survivors were the most dangerous creatures in any galaxy. Kethral made another decision. He would send a report to his superiors in the Vexian military. He would recommend that the humans be watched carefully, that they not be provoked, that the Vexian Empire find a way to make allies of them rather than enemies. He did not know if anyone would listen, but he had to try. Because if the humans ever turned their survival instincts against the galaxy, Kethral was not sure anyone would be left to tell the story. He looked out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, the human was returning to his world, carrying his ancient weapon. A weapon that represented everything his species was: dangerous, determined, deadly, and everyone had laughed at it. Kethral did not think he would ever laugh at humans again. 6 months had passed since the auction on Station Nexus 7. Commander Kethral had almost forgotten about the encounter with the human and his ancient weapon. The daily concerns of military life had pushed the memory to the back of his mind, though occasionally it would surface during quiet moments. His warning report had been received by Vexian High Command. They had acknowledged it with the standard response used for information deemed interesting but not urgent. Kethral understood what that meant. They had filed it away and moved on to more pressing matters. Now he stood on the bridge of the Vexian warship Dominance, watching the planet below with growing concern. The world was called Thessar 4, a mining colony that had been under Vexian control for 2 centuries. 3 days ago, all communication with the planet had stopped. A rescue and investigation team had been sent down. They had also gone silent. "Commander, we are detecting weapons fire on the surface," his tactical officer reported. "Multiple locations, plasma signatures, and something else we cannot identify." Kethral moved to the sensor station. The display showed the colony's main settlement, a sprawling complex of mining operations and living quarters that housed over 50,000 Vexians. Heat blooms from weapons fire dotted the map, but there was something wrong with the readings. "What is that interference?" he asked, pointing at the strange patterns on the display. "Unknown, Commander. The sensors are picking up small, fast-moving projectiles, but they do not match any weapon in our database. The signatures are similar to what we saw in the human historical records you requested." Human weapons. Kethral felt a chill run through him. "Are there humans on Thessar 4? "Negative, Commander. No humans in this sector according to official records." "Then how do you explain those readings?" Before the tactical officer could respond, the communication station lit up with an incoming signal. "Commander, we are receiving a transmission from the surface. It appears to be from the Krellian trade delegation." Kethral had forgotten that the Krellians had a trading post on Thessar 4. They dealt in rare minerals and precious metals, using the Vexian colony as a hub for their operations in this part of space. "Put it through," he ordered. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a Krellian face that Kethral recognized immediately. It was the same Krellian who had mocked the human's revolver at the auction. His green scales were now covered in dust and what looked like blood. His eyes were wide with terror. "Commander Kethral, you must send help immediately. They are everywhere. We cannot stop them." "Calm yourself," Kethral said, though his own hearts were beating faster. "Who is attacking you? What forces are you facing?" "Humans!" the Krellian screamed. "Humans with primitive weapons, but they will not die. We shoot them with plasma, and they keep coming. Our shields mean nothing to them, nothing!" Kethral felt the blood drain from his face. "Humans? How many?" "We do not know. They came from nowhere. They had no ships, no warning. One moment everything was peaceful. The next they were among us, killing everyone." "Describe their weapons," Kethral demanded. "Projectile weapons, the kind that use chemical explosives. We laughed at them. We laughed!" The Krellian's voice cracked with hysteria. "They punch through our armor. They punch through walls. They do not stop." Behind the Krellian, Kethral could see chaos. Vexians and other species were running in panic. He could hear the distinctive crack, crack, crack of what he now recognized as human gunfire. It sounded nothing like the whine of plasma weapons or the hum of particle beams. It was sharper, more brutal, more final. "We are dispatching troops now," Kethral said. "Hold your position and—" The transmission cut off. The last thing Kethral saw was the Krellian turning toward something off-screen. His face contorted in pure terror. The last thing he heard was a thunderous boom followed by silence. "Get me ground troops ready for immediate deployment," Kethral ordered. "Full tactical gear. And contact the human embassy on Station Central. I need to speak with their military representative." "Commander?" His second-in-command looked confused. "Should we not simply neutralize the threat? Our forces can handle a few humans with primitive weapons." Kethral rounded on him. "A few humans with primitive weapons just silenced an entire colony, a colony defended by Vexian troops with plasma rifles and particle cannons. Do not underestimate them. I made that mistake once. I will not make it again." He returned his attention to the sensor display. The weapons fire below was intensifying. Whatever was happening down there, it was getting worse. 2 hours later, Kethral led the first wave of reinforcements to the surface. He had brought 500 of the Dominance's best soldiers, all equipped with the latest weapons and armor. He had also brought portable shield generators capable of stopping any known projectile. It was not enough. They landed at the main spaceport on the outskirts of the colony. The facility was in ruins. Buildings had been destroyed, vehicles overturned and burning. Bodies lay everywhere. Vexians and Krellians and members of half a dozen other species. All of them had been killed by the same type of weapon. Small holes in their bodies, sometimes one, sometimes many. No plasma burns, no particle damage, just holes. "Spread out and search for survivors," Kethral ordered. "Stay alert. These humans are not to be underestimated." His troops moved through the ruins with professional efficiency. They found survivors hiding in basements and storage rooms, all of them in shock. The stories they told were consistent. The humans had appeared without warning. They had attacked with projectile weapons that bypassed shields as if they did not exist. They moved through the colony like ghosts, killing anyone they found. "Commander!" one of his sergeants called out. "We have contact! Humans, 200 meters south." Kethral ran toward the position. When he arrived, he found his troops taking cover behind the remains of a transport vehicle. Across an open plaza, he could see movement in the shadows of a collapsed building. "How many?" he asked. "6, Commander. They are using the rubble for cover." "6." Kethral shook his head. "We have 50 soldiers here. They have 6. Why are we hiding? The sergeant looked at him with eyes that held the beginning of fear. Commander, we lost 12 soldiers in the initial contact. They killed 12 of us before we even saw them. Kethral stared at him. 12? Against 6? They are very accurate, Commander, and their weapons do not care about our armor. Before Kethral could respond, a shot rang out across the plaza. One of his soldiers, who had raised his head slightly above cover, fell backward with a hole in his helmet, dead before he hit the ground. "Sniper!" someone shouted. More shots followed. They came from multiple directions, not just from the building ahead. The humans had surrounded them while they were focused on the obvious threat. "Return fire!" Kethral ordered. His troops began shooting their plasma rifles at every shadow, every hint of movement. The air filled with the whine of energy weapons, but for every shot they fired, the humans fired back with deadly precision. Vexian soldiers fell one by one, each killed by a single well-placed round. Kethral grabbed a fallen rifle and added his fire to the barrage. He caught a glimpse of movement and fired, but the human had already moved. These creatures were fast. Faster than any being had a right to be. Then he saw something that made him freeze. A human emerged from behind a pile of rubble, walking directly toward the Vexian position. It was a female, dressed in simple armor that looked like it would barely stop a blade, let alone plasma. She carried a weapon larger than the handguns the others were using, a long rifle with a scope mounted on top. His soldiers fired at her. Their plasma bolts should have vaporized her where she stood. Instead, they seemed to pass through empty air. She was moving, weaving between the shots with a grace that bordered on supernatural. She raised her rifle without breaking stride and fired. The soldier next to Kethral fell, a hole punched clean through his chest armor. She fired again. Another soldier down. And again. And again. She never missed. She never slowed. She walked through the storm of plasma fire as if it were nothing more than colored light, picking off his troops with the cold efficiency of a machine. "Fall back!" Kethral shouted. "Fall back to the ships!" His remaining soldiers broke and ran. Kethral ran with them, shame burning in his hearts, but survival instinct burning hotter. Behind them, the humans did not pursue. They did not need to. They had made their point. By the time Kethral reached the spaceport, he had lost 30 more soldiers. The humans had followed them at a distance, picking off stragglers and anyone who exposed themselves for too long. It was not a battle. It was an execution. They lifted off with less than half the troops they had landed with. As the shuttles rose into the air, Kethral looked down at the colony through a viewport. He could see the humans now, gathered in the plaza where the battle had taken place. They were not celebrating. They were not cheering. They simply stood there, watching the ships depart with the same calm focus they had shown throughout the fight. One of them raised a hand. Kethral could not tell if it was a wave or a salute or something else entirely. Then they turned and disappeared into the ruins. Back aboard the Dominance, Kethral sat in his quarters and tried to make sense of what had happened. His analysis teams were already studying the sensor data from the battle. What they found terrified them. The human weapons fired projectiles at speeds that made tracking almost impossible. The projectiles were small and dense, designed to penetrate armor rather than burn through it like plasma. Personal shields, which generated energy barriers to stop energy weapons, offered no protection because the projectiles were physical objects with too much kinetic force. But more disturbing than the weapons was the humans themselves. They moved differently than any species Kethral had ever seen in combat. They used cover instinctively, exposed themselves for only fractions of a second, and never stopped moving. They communicated without speaking, using hand signals and body language that his translators could not interpret. They fought as individuals, but moved as a single organism, and they were accurate, terrifyingly accurate. Every shot they fired seemed to find its target. In the entire battle, Kethral had not seen a single human miss. A communication request interrupted his thoughts. It was from the human embassy, responding to his earlier query. The human who appeared on his screen was not what he expected. It was a young male in a formal uniform with a pleasant expression and polite demeanor. He looked nothing like the killers Kethrall had just faced. "Commander Kethrall," the human said, "I am Captain Marcus Webb, military liaison for the Human Diplomatic Corps. I understand you requested information about human military operations in the Thessar sector. I just lost 250 soldiers to a handful of humans with primitive weapons," Kethrall said flatly. "I want to know who they are and why they attacked a Vexian colony." The captain's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "I see. May I ask what you were doing on Thessar 4? "Responding to a distress call. The colony went silent 3 days ago." "And what did you find when you arrived?" Kethrall described the scene, the destruction, the bodies, the Krellians' terrified transmission. As he spoke, he watched the captain's face for any reaction. There was none. The human listened with the same polite attention he might give to a weather report. "That is concerning," the captain said when Kethrall finished. "I will need to investigate further before I can provide you with any official information. However, I can tell you that no human military forces are supposed to be operating in that sector." "Supposed to be?" Kethrall caught the phrasing. "What does that mean?" The captain paused for just a moment. "Humans are not always easy to control, Commander. We have many different nations, many different organizations, many different agendas. Not all of them answer to the government I represent." "Are you saying these were rogue humans? Criminals?" "I am saying that I do not know who they are or why they attacked your colony. But I will find out." The captain leaned forward slightly. "In the meantime, I would recommend that you do not engage them further. The soldiers you faced today were clearly well-trained and well-equipped. If you confront them again without proper preparation, you will lose more people." Kethrall felt his temper rise. "You expect me to simply let them occupy a Vexian colony, to do nothing while they murder our citizens?" "I expect you to be intelligent about this," the captain said, his voice hardening slightly. "You have already seen what happens when you underestimate humans. Do not make the same mistake twice." The transmission ended. Kethrall stared at the blank screen for a long moment, his 4 hands clenched into fists. He thought about the auction, about the old man with the revolver, about the warning he had tried to give his superiors. No one had listened then. Perhaps they would listen now. He began composing a new report. This one would be marked highest priority. It would include everything he had seen, everything he had learned, and a single stark recommendation. Do not provoke the humans. He did not know if anyone would believe him, but he had to try. Because if the humans decided to turn their attention to the wider galaxy, if they decided that primitive weapons were not enough and started using their other tools, the ones he had read about in their history, the nuclear weapons and biological weapons and all the other horrors they had invented. Kethrall did not want to think about what would happen then. He finished the report and sent it. Then he turned to look at the star map on his wall. Somewhere out there, Earth spun around its yellow sun, a small planet by galactic standards, unremarkable in almost every way, except for its people. Kethrall wondered what the humans on Thessar 4 were doing right now. Were they celebrating their victory, planning their next attack, or simply waiting, watching, preparing for whatever came next? He suspected it was the last option. Everything he had seen suggested that humans were patient predators. They did not rush. They did not panic. They planned and prepared and waited for the perfect moment to strike. And when they struck, they did not stop until the job was done. His communicator chimed again. It was his second in command, requesting orders. What should they do about Thessar 4? Should they launch another attack? Request reinforcements? Wait for guidance from high command? Kethral thought about it for a long moment. He thought about the female human walking through plasma fire like it was rain. He thought about his soldiers dying one by one, killed by weapons that the galaxy had dismissed as toys. He thought about the old man at the auction, holding his revolver with reverence and speaking of survival. "We wait," Kethral said finally. "We watch, and we learn everything we can about these humans. And if they attack us?" Kethral looked at the star map again. "Then we pray that they show us the same mercy they showed the colony." He knew, even as he said it, that they would not. Humans did not show mercy to enemies. Their history had proven that beyond any doubt. The galaxy had laughed at humanity and their primitive weapons. The galaxy was about to learn just how wrong it had been. The Galactic Council chambers had never been so quiet. Representatives from over 200 species filled the massive amphitheater, their attention fixed on the evidence being presented. On the main display, footage from HFY 4 played on repeat. Plasma fire, screaming, the crack of human weapons, bodies falling. Commander Kethral stood at the speaking platform, his 4 hands gripping the railing. He had been summoned to testify before the council, to explain how a handful of humans with primitive weapons had defeated Vexian military forces and occupied an entire colony. "As you can see from the recordings," he said, his voice steady despite the shame burning in his heart, "the human weapons bypass our shield technology entirely. The projectiles are purely kinetic, physical objects moving at speeds that our sensors struggle to track. Our personal shields are designed to stop energy, not mass traveling at such velocities." A Krellian counselor rose from his seat. Kethral recognized him as the father of the traitor who had died in the initial attack. "You are telling us that our greatest technological advantage, the energy shields that have protected us for millennia, are useless against weapons that humans invented before they even discovered electricity." "I am telling you what I witnessed," Kethral replied. "Make of it what you will." The council chamber erupted in arguments. Species that had been rivals for centuries now found common cause in their disbelief. How could this be possible? How could the primitive humans pose any threat to civilizations that had mastered faster-than-light travel? The Nexian ambassador raised a tentacle for attention. Perhaps the commander is exaggerating. Perhaps these were not ordinary humans but some kind of enhanced soldiers. Genetic modifications, cybernetic implants. Something that would explain their capabilities. "I thought the same thing," Kethral admitted. "I requested detailed biological scans of the human remains we recovered from the battle." He pressed a control, and new data appeared on the main display. "These are the results. The humans we faced were biologically identical to baseline humanity. No modifications, no enhancements, no cybernetics. They were simply humans, using weapons their ancestors developed over a century ago." The silence that followed was deafening. A door at the side of the chamber opened, and every eye turned to watch as a single figure entered. It was the old human from the auction, the one Kethral had seen 6 months ago. He walked with the same quiet confidence, the same subtle danger in his bearing, and on his hip, in a holster that looked older than most species' written history, was the revolver. Behind him walked Captain Marcus Webb and 2 other humans in military uniforms. They moved like the soldiers on HFY 4, smooth and controlled, and constantly aware of their surroundings. "The Council recognizes the human delegation," the Nexian ambassador announced, though his voice carried none of its usual authority. "You requested this opportunity to address the assembly? Speak." The old man walked to the speaking platform. Kethral stepped aside, watching him with a mixture of respect and wariness. Up close, he could see that the human was even older than he had appeared at the auction. His hands bore scars, faded but visible. His eyes held a weight that came only from years of hard experience. My name is James Harrell, the human said. I am a retired Sergeant Major of the United States Army. I have served my country in 4 wars and more minor conflicts than I care to count. I have killed in defense of my people and watched my friends die in my arms. I am not a diplomat or a politician. I am a soldier. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of species that had thought themselves superior to humanity since first contact. You called this meeting because you are afraid. Good. Fear is the beginning of wisdom. The Krellian counselor stood again. You dare to speak to us of wisdom? Your species has been traveling the stars for a mere half-century. We have been building empires since before your ancestors learned to make fire. James Harrell smiled. It was the same smile Cathrall remembered from the auction. The smile of someone who had seen too much to be impressed by anything. Let me tell you a story, the human said. 2,000 years ago, by our calendar, a small group of Greek soldiers faced an army that outnumbered them by more than 10 to 1. They had no technology that their enemies did not have, no special weapons, no advantages except one. They were willing to die to protect their homeland. He paused, looking around the chamber. 300 Spartans held a pass against a Persian army for 3 days. They knew they would die. They fought anyway. And when they finally fell, they had killed so many enemies that the Persian king himself wept with frustration and rage. An interesting story, the Nexian ambassador said. But what relevance does ancient history have to current events? Relevance? James Harrell laughed, a sound without humor. The relevance is that nothing has changed. Humans have been fighting against impossible odds since we first picked up rocks and sticks. We have never stopped. We will never stop. It is in our blood, in our bones, in the very core of what we are. He drew the revolver from his holster. The council chamber froze, guards reaching for weapons that suddenly seemed inadequate. But the old man simply held the gun up, showing it to the assembly. This is a Colt single-action army revolver. It was manufactured in 1892. It fires 6 rounds of .45 caliber ammunition, propelled by chemical explosive. By your standards, it is a museum piece, a relic, a toy. He opened the cylinder, showing that it was loaded. This toy has killed more enemies than any of you can count. It has been passed down through my family for generations, each one adding to its legacy of death. My great-great-grandfather carried it. My great-grandfather carried it. My grandfather carried it. My father carried it. I carried it through jungles and deserts and cities torn apart by war. He clicked the cylinder closed. And it has never failed. Impressive sentiment, the Krellian counselor said, though his voice shook slightly. But we are not barbarians fighting with primitive weapons. We have ships that can destroy planets, weapons that can crack moons, armies that number in the billions. What can humans do against such power? James Harrell turned to face him directly. Do you know what we found on Thessar 4, when we liberated that colony from the slavers who had taken it? The chamber went silent. Cathrall felt his blood run cold. Slavers? The Vexians were not the original occupants of Thessar 4, James continued. 2 centuries ago, they conquered that world. They killed the native population and replaced them with their own kind. The beings who lived there before were called the Thess. They were a gentle people without weapons or armies. The Vexians slaughtered them like animals. He looked at Cathrall. Did you know that, Commander? Did you know that your people committed genocide on that world? Cathrall could not respond. He had not known. The historical records he had access to mentioned nothing of it. We found records, James said, hidden beneath the colony. The Thess kept them, buried deep where the Vexians would never find them. They documented everything, the attacks, the massacres, the children thrown into mining pits to work until they died. The elders left to starve because they were no longer useful. His voice hardened. The Krellian traders on Thessar 4 were not innocent merchants. They were buying Thess survivors on the black market. The few who had escaped the genocide. They were selling them as exotic pets to wealthy collectors across the galaxy. The Krellian counselor's scales went pale. I knew nothing of this. My son was a legitimate trader. He would never. Your son bought a 12-year-old Thess girl 3 days before we arrived. James cut him off. He planned to sell her to a collector on your homeworld. He told her what would happen to her when she arrived. He told her in detail. We found his records. The chamber erupted in chaos. Species that had never liked each other began shouting accusations. Some called for investigations. Others demanded proof. A few quietly tried to leave, perhaps remembering their own secrets that they did not want examined too closely. James Harrell waited for the noise to die down. When it did, he continued. Humans have a word for people who hurt children. We call them monsters. And we have a very old tradition when it comes to dealing with monsters. He raised the revolver, pointing at the ceiling. The guards tensed, but no one moved to stop him. We hunt them down. We find them wherever they hide, and we kill them. He lowered the weapon. The humans on Thessar 4 were not rogue soldiers or criminals. They were a unit of our special forces, operating under orders from the highest levels of our government. They were sent to rescue the surviving Thess and punish those responsible for their suffering. This is an act of war, the Krellian counselor shouted. You attacked a sovereign Vexian colony. We liberated an occupied territory and freed its enslaved population, James replied calmly. If you choose to call that war, then war is what you will have. Kethrall stepped forward. He had been listening to the human's words, piecing together the implications. What happens now? Do you intend to attack other worlds? To punish every species that has ever wronged another? James looked at him for a long moment. No, Commander. We are not conquerors. We have no interest in ruling other species or taking their territories. We want only one thing. What? Justice. The human's voice was soft, but it carried through the entire chamber. We want the galaxy to know that there are consequences for cruelty, that the strong cannot simply destroy the weak because they have bigger weapons. That somewhere out there someone is watching, someone who cares, someone who will act. He holstered his revolver. Humans are not the most advanced species in this galaxy. We do not have the best technology or the largest armies. But we have something that many of you have forgotten. We have principles. We have beliefs that we are willing to die for. And we have the will to fight, no matter the odds. The Nexian ambassador spoke carefully. You are suggesting that humans will appoint themselves as the moral guardians of the galaxy? That you will decide what is right and wrong and punish those who disagree? We are suggesting that evil should have consequences, James replied. For too long, powerful species have done whatever they wanted to weaker ones because there was no one to stop them. That changes now. Humanity will not stand by while innocents suffer. He began walking toward the exit, his escort falling in behind him. At the door, he paused and looked back at the assembled counselors. You laughed at us. You called us primitive. You dismissed our weapons as toys and our history as irrelevant. But those toys just liberated a world. That history just saved a people from extinction. His eyes swept the chamber one final time. The next time you think about harming the innocent, remember Thessar 4. Remember what primitive weapons can do in the hands of people who are willing to use them. Remember that humans are watching. He left. The door closed behind him with a sound that echoed through the silent chamber. Kethrall remained at the speaking platform, his mind racing. He thought about the old man's words, about the Thess, a people he had never heard of, about the slaves being traded under his people's noses, about the revolver, ancient and primitive and deadly beyond anything he had imagined. The Krellian counselor was speaking, demanding retribution, calling for fleet mobilization. Other species were arguing about treaties and boundaries and the implications of human military action. But Kethrall was not listening. He was thinking about the future. Humans had announced themselves to the galaxy not as supplicants seeking acceptance, but as judges willing to render verdicts. They had shown that their primitive weapons could defeat advanced technology. They had demonstrated that their soldiers could match or exceed any force sent against them. And they had made clear that they were willing to fight for more than just survival. They were willing to fight for ideals. Kethril understood finally why the old man had paid 1,000 credits for that revolver. It was not sentiment. It was not nostalgia. It was a statement, a declaration of who humans were and what they believed. The weapon represented something that the galaxy had forgotten, that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe was not the most advanced technology or the biggest army. Sometimes the most dangerous thing was conviction, the unshakable belief that some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth killing for. Humans had that conviction. They had always had it, and now the galaxy knew. Kethril made a decision. He walked out of the council chamber, ignoring the chaos behind him. He needed to speak with the human delegation before they left. He needed to understand. He found them in the docking bay, preparing to board their shuttle. James Harrell saw him coming and waited, his hand resting casually near the holstered revolver. "Commander," the old man said, "did you come to arrest us?" "No." Kethril stopped a few meters away. "I came to ask a question." "Ask." "On Thessar 4, your soldiers killed my people, 250 of them, men who were following orders, who believed they were responding to a distress call. They did not know about the Thess or the slaves. They were just soldiers doing their duty." James nodded slowly. "They were. And we regret their deaths. Truly." "Then why kill them? Why not simply tell them what was happening? Why not give them a chance to leave?" The old man's expression softened slightly. "Would they have listened, Commander? If we had told them that their colony was built on genocide and sustained by slavery, would they have believed us? Or would they have attacked us as invaders and liars?" Kethril could not answer. He knew, deep in his hearts, that his soldiers would have fought. They would have defended Vexian territory against any intruder, regardless of the reason. It was what they were trained to do. "That is why we do what we do," James said. "We have learned, through centuries of bitter experience, that evil does not yield to reason. It does not listen to arguments. It understands only force, and so force is what we use. But you claim to stand for justice. Is there not injustice in killing those who are merely ignorant?" James was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years. "There is, and it haunts us. Every soldier I have ever known carries ghosts, Commander. The faces of people we have killed who did not deserve to die. The knowledge that in fighting for what we believe is right, we sometimes become what we fight against." He met Kethril's eyes. "That is the burden we bear. We do not pretend to be pure or perfect. We are humans. We make mistakes. We go too far. We fall short. But we keep trying. We keep fighting. Because if we stop, if we give up, then the monsters win." Kethril understood. He did not agree with everything the human said, but he understood. There was a terrible logic to it, a brutal honesty that he could respect, even as he recoiled from its implications. "What happens now?" he asked. "Will there be war between our peoples?" "That is up to your people," James replied. "We have done what we came to do." "The Thess survivors are safe. The slavers are dead. If the Vexians choose to seek revenge, we will defend ourselves. But we will not attack first." "And if we choose peace?" The old man smiled, and for the first time there was warmth in it. "Then perhaps we can learn from each other. Your people have technology and knowledge that we lack. We have perspectives and experiences that you need. Together we might build something better than either of us could alone." He extended his hand. Kethril stared at it, uncertain. In Vexian culture, physical contact between strangers was unusual, but he understood that this was a human custom, a gesture of respect and goodwill. He reached out with one of his 4 hands and grasped the human's. "I will recommend peace to my superiors," Kethral said. "I cannot promise they will listen, but I will try." "That is all any of us can do," James replied. "Try. Fight for what we believe in, and hope that in the end we have done more good than harm." He released Kethral's hand and turned toward the shuttle. His escort was already aboard, waiting. At the door, he paused one last time. "Commander, one more thing." "Yes?" James touched the holster at his hip. "That revolver at the auction. You asked why it was worth 1,000 credits. Now you know. It is not just a weapon. It is a symbol, a reminder of who we are and where we came from." He patted the holster. "Humans are not dangerous because of our technology. We are dangerous because we never forget. We never forgive. And we never, ever stop." He boarded the shuttle. The door closed. Moments later, the craft lifted off and disappeared into the stars. Kethral stood alone in the docking bay, watching the empty space where the shuttle had been. He thought about the old man's words, about primitive weapons and ancient principles, about monsters and justice and the burden of doing what was necessary. The galaxy had changed today. The balance of power had shifted in ways that no one could predict. A species that everyone had dismissed as primitive had proven itself capable of challenging the established order, and it had all started with an old revolver at an auction. Kethral began walking back to his ship. He had a report to write and recommendations to make. He did not know if his people would choose peace or war. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever choice they made, they would never laugh at humans again. The age of dismissing humanity was over. The age of respecting them had begun.